welcome. The Australians, I think, are standing behind the podium because there's not enough microphones to go around for us. So thanks very much for coming today. I want to give you a quick background first. In 2018, the Actuaries Institute decided to make a radical change in the way that they designed, developed, and deliver education. The primary change was hiring professional educators to come on board to work full-time to think about the system and what needed to be changed. This talk is in 2 and a bit parts. The first part is some indulgence by looking at the past to try to understand where we are today. The main part will be about the execution of the strategy, the actual implementation. I'll talk in general, and then we're benefiting from Georgina and Amanda talking specifically about life insurance and the new data science subjects. And time permitting, I'll come back at the end to talk about what the future holds, which resonates quite well with what Clifford was saying. So, if we go right back in time, a long, long time ago, and right throughout history up to today, there's always been this conflict in actuarial education, this balance between the educating of people and how much experience was required to pass an exam. When we came on board, and what we thought about quite deeply is to make sure that the education of any subject, the prior learning was appropriate for that, and you didn't anticipate future learning in the subject that you were teaching. We should be good at setting exams because we've been doing it since 1850. Lots of experience, but as ever, actuaries tended to focus on the wrong things, and so almost immediately it was a case of, wait a minute, people may pass too quickly. Can we put artificial constraints on getting them through? Obviously that didn't work, and it took about 20 years before the tuition service came along. Obviously I'm talking about the Institute of Actuaries in the UK. That tuition service existed till the mid-90s. I was in that service. Fantastic. I remember my economics material. Lesson 1, read chapters 1 to 17 of the textbook. That was it. So, 1880s, they started publishing books. There's a great book by King on life contingencies. It went through various editions, various authors. I learned from its updated one in the 90s, and it contained exactly the same content from 100 years before. The 20th century, lots of new books were written. But there was a lot of debate. There's a lot of good sort of presidential speeches, and they're worth a read. This one from Newbold in 1890 was really concerned that the fellow is the top thing. It's the be-all and end-all of everything, but there's not going to be enough jobs. And there were 173 fellows at that time, 94 fellows 50 years before. So these days we don't regard fellows at the top as very important, but we can just demonstrate that if you want to very easily by looking at, say, SKL salary survey of actuaries in Australia or fellows, as you can see the continuous line. Post-qualification, as you gain experience and responsibilities, typically your remuneration goes up. So this fellowship plus experience is required. Jumping back to, this is the speech at the 100th anniversary of the Institute in the UK. This one, there's been a theme talking about the exams throughout time, and they're still talking about it today, about the fact that it can take too long to go through the system. You can be exhausted. You're not going to be stimulated by the material because it's a hurdle to get over. So I think this policy of wanting to change has always been there. And so we'll talk shortly about implementation. This paper is of interest, I think, because it should resonate with the topics people are talking today about data scientists. Because in the 40s, they introduced a lot of statistics into the syllabus, and people were very careful to delineate between an actuary and a statistician. And I should be more careful in my writing, because I should say careful, different than a statistician rather than more than a statistician. But this concept that was coming up at Caroline Bennett's talk yesterday around it's the interpretation and advice to decision makers, that's always been there in the program. It's just maybe some parts, some people have forgotten about it. This is a model of the structure was, again, we should recognize, if you look at those 3 chevrons, in the early part of your career, you're learning about the subject. When you're newly qualified and mid-range actuary, you should be spending a lot of time deeply trying to understand what that material is and implementing it. But to get really advanced, you need to be able to learn to communicate without using the jargon. And that's when you're really an expert. This was Pegler in 1968, to give a date. So it was just after the American Academy introduced their Code of Conduct in 66, but the UK and Australia was a few years later. So these days, we wrap up the concept of fellow and experience underneath the Code of Conduct. The rest of this talk, or most of it, will concentrate on that blue box. Essentially, the theme that we can distill all the past was this desire that a well-prepared student should pass. And what we're going to talk about by bringing actuarial educators as professional educators into the profession as how we've implemented that strategy. So for today's short talk, I really want to touch upon three things of how we've executed that. Is one, to have a clear structure, a clear understanding of the curriculum, to be very clear on what do you mean by a student achieving the competencies in any subject. And finally, which Amanda and Georgina will talk about, is this concept of delivering student-centered education. So when we look at the curriculum from the early days, you can see that the knowledge is scaffolded over time. In the first part of your learning, it's very maths-based. And then we have to be entice the high school students, the mathematical-minded ones, to come to do this. And then we shock them when they reach the honours year and say, well, hang on a minute, nobody cares about your maths. Can you talk to us in English or whatever your local language is? And please, the other component is, so it's language and critical thinking. So what we've done in Australia, we've developed courses that teach language skills and teach critical thinking skills, as well as in this middle part, this bridging program, this actuary program, which takes them to associate level. So it's quite general, but it really gets them into the actuarial process of being disinterested in a problem and stop our students being dogmatic in their answers, to think widely and very holistically. And then we take them to the fellowship program, where we have a deep dive, traditionally in domains of knowledge, but more recently, and Amanda will talk about how we've branched out and used a skill-based approach in the data science arena. And in terms of the assessments, what we've done, we've used the Australian qualifications framework to map where those programs are to give us a guide. It is a guide, it's not absolutely definitive, but it sort of says there's an ordinary degree at the maths level, then you do an honours degree, leading on to a master's degree. So the fellowship was similar to other societies, the DAV, IFOA, that there was 3 stages, essentially 2 principles and an application stage. I'd like to just reiterate that domains and skills do change over time. We've witnessed that. 19th century life insurance was very different to 20th century life insurance, the rise of GI, health insurance, and now data science. Just before I pass over to Georgina to talk about this concept of a student-centered virtual university, what we've done here is think very much about putting the students as a customer, thinking about them. They come from university into the world of work. The world's changed. These people require a bit of help in hand to get through their studies, and that's what we've been able to do because of the new technology that we can use, Zoom, etc., to teach them at a distance. I'd like to hand over to Georgina.
Thanks, Mike. Our student-centred approach to education applies across all our subjects. Importantly, the student experience is at the core of our decision-making. Our role as educators is to give students the tools and exposure in order to be well prepared to help them to pass. So, how do we implement this? The overarching role of the Chief Examiner is central to this. The Chief Examiner designs, manages, and delivers the end-to-end process. Firstly, the Chief Examiner establishes a curriculum, including a high-level set of student outcomes which cascade down to learning objectives, course content, and delivery of that content. From a student's perspective, this means that they have a clear idea of their scope for study. Not only does the Chief Examiner design the curriculum and teach the course, but they also have a hands-on role in managing the assessment process. We balance consistency in our teaching and our assessments with ensuring independence by having an independent examiner review and sign off assessments, engaging fellows as markers, and having a governance framework which approves our pass lists. Lastly, and most importantly, teaching. As shown in this slide, the Chief Examiner has a hands-on role throughout the semester. We offer students a combination of live and pre-recorded tutorials. We also provide students with real-time access to an online discussion forum. As Mike mentioned, we're able to do this because we have the infrastructure to support it. We deliver our subjects through an easy-to-navigate online platform called Canvas, which is a one-stop shop for all materials and communication. This virtual university means that we support students living abroad and in different time zones. It also allows us to connect students with guest speakers who can provide practical insights into how the course materials apply in the real world. This helps our students to develop their application and judgment skills. So what's my take-home message? This end-to-end role of the Chief Examiner is special because it ensures that our education principles are implemented consistently. This means that the student experience is at the heart of what we do throughout the whole process. Okay, so now I'd like to walk you through an example of how this applies in practice to assessing modelling skills for life insurance subjects. As an example, one of our subjects, which is called product development, has a student outcome to construct a profit test and explain results. So then we need to think about how does that cascade down to teaching and assessment. We recognise the time it takes to build a projection model. We understand the time it takes to perform checks to ensure numbers are reasonable and to document thoroughly. So what we do is we test these skills in a non-time pressured environment through assignments rather than exams. What this allows us to do is to test a much deeper understanding of concepts. We can test how students manage data limitations, uncertainty, where there isn't just one right answer. What students need to do is their own independent research, set and justify assumptions, and explain why their results are reasonable. Similarly, they need to communicate the implications if actual experience differs from their assumptions. Our assignments are both an assessment and a teaching tool. As a Chief Examiner, I support my students by answering questions relating to the assignment during the tutorial program and via the discussion forum. This makes the process fair because all students have access to that information or access to attending the tutorials. We also provide students with what's called a rubric. And for those of you that are not familiar with this term, a rubric is a set of instructions. This gives students more detail and information about what's expected for each grade level for each part of the assignment. We ensure that we have end-to-end consistency as our independent markers then assess students against the same rubric. From a student's perspective, or from the student's experience, this means that they know what good and bad looks like when preparing their assignment. And we follow through when our independent markers mark the assignments. I hope that this has given you a brief insight into the Life Insurance Fellowship stream. I'm now going to hand over to Amanda, who will share some insights on the development of the Data Science Fellowship Program.
No pressure, Amanda, but you've only got 4
minutes.
minutes.
Okay. Just what I needed to hear.
Can we go over a minute? Yeah. Yep. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Georgina. So Mike has talked about our journey of actuarial education over time, and Georgina has spoken about our more recent journey in implementing actuarial principles within the education framework in Australia. So I'll just spend a few minutes talking about our very recent journey into educating students in the area of data science. This journey started in 2018. Thank you, Janice. I've forgotten to move my slides forward. The journey for data science started in 2018 when a group of practicing actuaries who are members of our Data Science Practice Committee put together a 61-page wish list of all the topics they felt data science actuaries should know. So we took that big document and we converted it into 2 data science-based subjects. Data science principles, which all Australian students now study at university, compulsory subject, and data science applications, which we teach through the Institute as an elective subject, and I'm the current chief examiner for that subject, and a call out to some of my data science students who are here today. So every Australian student now studies data science principles at university, but you might be interested to know what the take-up has been of the data science application subject, which is optional. So when we put this subject together, we had a suspicion that there was hunger amongst both students and their employers for studying data science topics in the actuarial curriculum. And as you can see on the slide, looking at 2023, we currently have more than half of our students electing to study data science as their final actuarial subject. So this suggests that there is a clear demand for data science topics within the actuarial curriculum. So what does our new data science application subject look like? Well, in creating the data science application subject, we've broken our fellowship subject mould in a couple of ways. Firstly, most of our fellowship subjects are offered on an industry-based path. So students choose to study subjects in life insurance, general insurance, or property and casualty, health insurance or retirement. But we recognise that actuaries are continuing to work in much wider fields these days, and the data science application subject reflects that. So rather than being industry-based, the data science application subject is actually a skills-based pathway, and we teach the data science skills across a range of different industries such as finance, government, retail, hospitality, aviation. Honestly, the list is endless and is as long as our imagination can be. We also have broken the mould in that the assessments for data science applications consist of a 50% weighting on the assignment and a 50% weighting on exams, which is different to our traditional approach of having almost all the weighting on exams. And that's because there are a lot of skills that we teach in the data science application subject that are just really hard to test in a time-constricted exam. So things like cleaning data and preparing it for modelling and analysing it, putting your models together, evaluating your models, and then communicating the results of those models to audience using appropriate language. So the topics that we cover in the data science application subject include technical skills. We teach students about neural networks, unsupervised learning, natural language processing, and business optimisation. But we wrap that learning up with a whole lot of business considerations that you need to take into account when you're deploying a model or even when you're starting to think about building one. So things like, if you're going to be working in a new domain, how do you gain knowledge about that domain and why is it important to do so? What sort of security, privacy and ethical considerations do you need to make when you're both thinking about deploying a model and when you actually come to deploy it? And how do you bring stakeholders on board when you're trying to implement change? So hopefully you now have a sense from the three of us that the Australian education program has developed significantly over the last 5 years. And Mark is just going to now finish with a look at our plans for the future, and particularly focusing on career-long learning, to use Clifford's terminology.
I think we're going into the Q&A, so the first question is, what are your plans for the future?
Okay. Actually, is this here? Yeah. Very similar in many respects to what Clifford was talking. I'll give you an example. We recently, there was a Matthew Buckle and Brett from TAL, Matthew from EMY and Brett from TAL, on our IFRS 17 working party, wanted to do 21 insight sessions. The events team was like, oh, that's tricky. But we immediately in the education said, we can do that. We can just leverage our existing learning management system. The operations team sat over there, nearly killed me, because we had 652 people join that course. Right? So we set out, we didn't do the information ourselves, it was the members telling us what, but we just facilitated how to present the information cleanly. We'll do the same in a variety of subjects. We're just looking to change something in our IT platform to enable you as members to click on various courses when you sign up each year. So, and more will become, we're working with GIPC on this, we'll work with LIPC, climate change, etc. So there'll be a suite of courses, but we will go externally. What we will point, like there's the young dogs, the young people who look after the data science, they have a lovely site which point people to Coursera and these other places and say, go and you can get it, this is the information. So our role is about giving some structure to those people who don't understand where to go.
Okay, so we've got a number of questions, and we'll try and get through them in the time we have. So the first one would be, any reactions to the CAS Institute, which I presume is in Australia, open to non-actuaries separating separate credentials for predictive analytics for insurance and catastrophic risk modelling and management?
It's the Casualty Actuarial Society. They're based in North America.
Oh.
And their early part of their program is aligned with the SOA, where they have a course called Predictive Analytics. There's a good book by Edward Fries, if you can buy it, and an Advanced Analytics, which is it's some way between our data science principles subject and towards Amanda's subject. Yeah, so we're comfortable with what we're doing. But,
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It's probably worth at that point saying as well, though, that we also offer micro-credentials to fellows who want to study some of these techniques, which I think some of the CAS initiatives are aimed at. So you've already qualified as a fellow, you might have taken a life insurance or a general insurance path, but you've heard about all these sexy new data science techniques that are available. How do you learn about them? The answer in Australia is that we're now offering a lot of our fellowship subjects as a micro-credential option as well.
And a micro-credential option is like a sort of basically the module plus a sort of certificate at the end of it.
We do three components. You could choose to do the exam and assignment, and if you're successful, you get a professional certificate. If you just choose to do the assignment, then it's just a certificate. Or you might just not decide to do any assessments, and we say, thank you very much, you've purchased the materials. We have no idea what you've done with it.
Okay. That actually brings to another question here. Should digital badging be part of the future of actuarial learning?
Well, we are using the digital badge now. We've created some digital badges. Louise over there and Eleanor, they've created, and so you'll be able to post them on your LinkedIn profile.
I guess with digital CVs now, with everyone using tools like LinkedIn, then there's a demand for having something that you can put on your profile to show that you've completed that learning. So. Yeah.
In Germany, I think at the DAV you get a little stamp to put on your name when you sign a piece of paper, but you can come back to that later. If I understand correctly, that's another question, everyone takes a course over a semester, and does this sufficiently meet students' work-life balance needs?
There's always Saturday and Sundays and evenings when you're young, so you've got plenty of time. We'd actually rather being less flippant, we've structured the courses so they're doable in that time period. It does require about 20 hours a week effort. Many students get a day off. What will face difficulties in the future as we're expanding, because we've certainly seen a big increase in the number of students, is those that are joining non-traditional firms on whether or not they get any study time. And that's something we have to face in the future.
And talking to some of my students, I know that there's an enormous amount of work and effort that goes into studying all of the subjects, not just data science. But those that put in that effort tell me that it was exhausting, but it was worth it, and they feel like they've learned a lot that they can use in the workplace.
Okay. Actually, it does go back to a question that someone sent in from the previous, and they said, I heard somewhere it only takes a few minutes a day to study for candidates to pass the exams. Is that true? So obviously not. It takes 20 hours a week.
Look, there's always somebody super bright who can just look at the material and tell you what you did wrong and pass the exam. But for the averagely intelligent person, it takes 20 hours a week.
Okay. And sorry, just so I understand it, how many weeks is a semester?
About 13 study weeks, and then coming up to the exam, about 14 weeks in total, I think.
And then you get a pause between doing the next semester? Or
You get
2 months, I think?
2 months, yeah, because there's a period of we go through like everybody, we go through an extensive checking process in terms of exams and stuff.
So there's sufficient period to party between the 2 semesters. I think that's the work-life balance part.
Yeah,
exactly.
Or start studying earlier.
No, I can't do that. Okay. I'll go back to the questions at the top. I'm going to read you a question. I'm not sure what an LLM is, but maybe you know.
Large language model.
Oh, thank you very much. I learned something today. A recent paper with preliminary findings in study of LLMs by Alibaba's Damo Academy and Singapore's Nanyang Technology University find the cost of GPT-4, the latest version of LLM developed by US startup OpenAI, is only 0.45% of hiring a senior data analyst. How would you think the trend will impact the data education?
Sorry, what was the last part of that question? What was the statistic that was stated?
The latest version of LLM,
Yep.
OpenAI, is only 0.45% of hiring a senior data analyst. I presume that's the cost of hiring, so 0.4, so it's 100,000.
Oh, I actually would have thought it would be a lot cheaper than that, because it's pretty
Okay.
cheap to run a machine that's available freely. But
Okay.
yeah.
We do.
So
No, go on, sorry.
I'm just checking. So the question is about how do we compete against?
How do you compete against
Models,
something
or-
that's, some AI
Yeah.
material out there that's giving you the wrong answer? Maybe the answer is you give the right
It's
answer.
easy, exactly. It's easy to compete against something that's given the wrong answer. But there was a really good discussion on this topic in the last session that I went to on, I guess, around the future of the actuary and working with AI. And the solution that the panellists talking about was that you can, really, we need to be using the output of those sorts of models, like ChatGPT, which uses the latest version of GPT. And then actuaries need to interpret that output and communicate what it means and check that it's reasonable. So it's input to us, it gives us another thing to think about, but really we've got to come up with the conclusions ourselves.
Okay. And one question I thought was quite, it's not really an education question, it's more like you've got people coming through now or taking exams that are completely different to ones, say, I did a few years ago. And how do they talk to each other because they've done completely different experiences? How do they you got this issue, when I did the exams they were difficult, now it's a doddle. How do you, but how do you cope with that generational change?
This goes back to Clifford's point here, that you really should learn all through your life. You can't, the concept of sitting the fellowship, you've done it, dusted, that's it, that's dead. It should have been dead a long time ago. And so you can't say people are sitting, there's different skills you've got to learn right throughout your life.
Okay. Let's see, is there any questions from the audience? I think I'm not sure if this one was previous, but it sounds good. What about micro-learning offerings?
We have structured our courses to be micro-learning in a sense, but it's quite difficult to think about how you split it up. For example, Janice, who's our superannuation expert, has created, or is in the process of creating a defined benefit micro-credential. Because we've done all the work in creating the material, but there's no point getting people to study it because nobody uses it anymore. But we get the odd person comes from South Africa every year to Australia who need to get stuff. So we're thinking about it, but it's not an easy thing to do. Yeah.
A micro pensions profile is probably getting ever more micro.
Absolutely. We've got some huge schemes here that's going to need managing for many years.
From pensions, actually, that's a bit sort of sad. Okay.
Can I just ask from the floor, your early subjects, are they done entirely through universities, or do you parallel how are they examined or exempted?
Yeah, so the early subjects are taught through, we have 8 accredited universities that take the whole program, but we will accept, so if people went to a non-accredited university, what they've done is sent off to an exemptions committee where we'll look at what they've done, and we may say that's fine. There's 2 subjects they have to go to accredited university, and they're more actuarial. These days they're called CS2 and CM1, but the other subjects are more general that any university could teach.
And would they be, I mean, do you then offer the exam if they don't get the exemption?
We act as a broker for the IFOA in those circumstances, but you know.
I mean, typically our teaching comes in after that, so they've done that university path first.
Beyond after the honours level or including honours?
It's a mixture. There's 4 subjects at honours level. 2 are taught by the universities, or technically 3, because the control cycle is 2 university subjects. Plus they do the data science principles subject, but we teach a subject called communication modelling and professionalism, and we've taken on board the asset liability management subject.
I was wondering, because I thought the statistic at the end, it was very interesting that more than half the people are doing data now. Yeah. And I wonder if the students now understand what that might mean. Is they're now not competing, they're competing with other professions or other areas where you're doing data. Yeah, so they're going, I've done data with the Institute of the Actuaries in Australia, but I'm also competing with other people who've done data, and it's a different market. And do they realise that? Or are you doing anything to explain that you're not quite doing actuarial work, you're really competing in a market which has got a lot more people in there, and what differentiates you compared to the rest of them?
Well, we do a lot more marketing of the qualifications and the profession than we used to. Before, people just came in to us for some reason to join the profession, but now we're in the world of we're going out promoting what the profession is to the universities. We've created an ambassador program where fellows go to the various universities, talk to the student societies. We have about 1,000 students go to the Australian universities, and about 250 of them turn up at our doors to stay with us in the future. We get about 400 actually turn up, but about 150 of them are people who are going to the Asia, and they'll end up joining the IFOA or SOA. So we've got that retention of 250, and we'd like to increase that, which means we have to do more work now. We have to we have to explain what the benefits of being a member of a profession is and why that's beneficial to you in the future.
Is it, may I ask, I mean, because I know some of the criticisms of the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries in the UK has been it's an expensive qualification to keep going. Is it regarded as an expensive one here? I still think it's worth it, by the way, but that's one of the criticisms I've heard it. Yeah,
it comes back to the member value. The member value proposition you have to work on more and more these days. And when you're in a traditional industry, like a traditional insurer, it's likely that they'll pay for the fees, and so that question doesn't come up. As you expand into these other areas, you know, will those employers pay those fees? And so you have to be providing value for money.
Are they paying for them or not?
Well, they seem to be at the moment, but some pay for themselves, yeah. But, if you want a rapid expansion of the numbers, you're going to have to address these issues.
Okay. Tax deductible?
In Australia, tax deductible, yeah.
Cool,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go to the quote.
At your marginal rate.
Oh, well then that's top rate for all actuaries then, I hope. I've always thought the difference between actuaries and statisticians was the depth of knowledge of underlying risks. With these changes, are we undying that or untying that? I think that means.
Now, this goes back to the discussion that was happened 70 odd years ago, is that you're picking up techniques, so we'll pick up a lot of data science techniques, which essentially what we mean is statistical techniques of larger data sets where you don't know what the variables of interest. I know Amanda's obviously the expert in all this. But the focus of our course is to start to take them on that journey that ultimately you're an advisor to decision makers, and that's what we're promoting. We don't get them there at the end of the education, the pre-qualification education process, but they're on that journey.
Okay. And a question near to my heart, if there are no questions, I think I'm getting a sign that means roll over, stop. Okay. I think we have to roll over to the next session, but thank you very much for that. Ingrid will come back to further questions.
Thank you.